Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hello and welcome from us. A double header here in the capital today. We're looking at UKIP and the Liberal Democrats, third and fourth in London in the election just 2 years ago. We'll start with UKIP. Its prime goal achieved. What future? Dan Friedman has this.
UKIP just doesn't do low drama, whether it's referendum campaigns.
It's a victory for ordinary people.
Party infighting.
UKIP Stephen Wolfe will be kept in hospital for another 2 days following what Nigel Farage called an altercation with fellow UKIP MEP Mike Hookham.
Or changes to its leadership.
After just 18 days in charge, it's being reported tonight that the UKIP leader Diane James is set to stand down.
UKIP's election story is also a fascinating one. At the 2015 general election, they got the third highest number of votes in London, up from 60,000 in 2010 to nearly 300,000 in the last general election. It still wasn't enough to win them a seat in London. But after disastrous council elections at the last local elections outside of London, the party is not standing in a third of London's seats.
It is a strategic decision that actually we want to ensure that Brexit takes place. I think all parties were caught a little bit on the hop with this snap election, so what we are doing is concentrating in those areas where there is either a strong Remain candidate or we know that we have very good support on the ground.
The party manifesto is due out this week, but so far their high-profile policy announcements include pledges to ban the burqa and Sharia courts, establish a one-in, one-out immigration policy, a £10 billion a year cut in the foreign aid budget, and to prevent all residential development on the Greenbelt.
There are a number of issues that motivated people to vote to leave, and probably one of those was immigration. And we have a very strong and robust immigration policy which we think would appeal to people, because it is about tackling those numbers of people coming here.
But if London voters can't pick UKIP in certain seats, which party is likely to benefit?
All the evidence from polling suggests that the UKIP vote is transferring in significant chunks from its previous vote for UKIP to the Conservatives. And that begs all sorts of questions in constituencies where if you add a sizable chunk of the UKIP vote to the previous Conservative vote, could that overhaul a Labour or other candidate?
Take a seat like Ealing Central and Acton, a key Labour marginal with a majority just shy of 300 and which UKIP aren't contesting. If those voters turn to the Conservatives, it could prove decisive. And that's exactly what's happening in this UKIP heartland on the Essex borders.
I voted UKIP at the last election. This time I shall vote Conservative because I think it's essential that we get a strong mandate to get a good Brexit.
I voted for UKIP since Farage has gone and that, and it seems like they've had a lot of trouble within the party. I don't think they're the false they were. Really, if you want to go with a Brexit, really you've got to vote for Conservative.
However, there are some who believe the party still has a role to play.
The only ones I'll be voting for, mate, I have to speak my mind, is UKIP, because I think they're the only ones who's going to force these issues through that the people want. Because we're losing our identity in this country. People that's been born here, they can't get a house, they're all going to immigrants.
But having campaigned so hard to leave the EU, this time it's the voters that leave UKIP who could prove equally decisive in this election.
Dan Friedman reporting there. I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Peter Whittle, Deputy Leader of UKIP, currently one of the two members of UKIP on the London Assembly. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
A couple of weeks back, 3 weeks back, I asked you how many candidates you'd be standing, and you'd say you were pretty well covered. I asked, were you going to stand at all 73? Pretty well covered. I think we took from that, well, nearly all, most. A third, you haven't been able to find candidates.
Well, no, it's not a question of not being able to find them. What it's been as well is that we said to branches that they could decide what they wanted to do in this election, and of course they took us at our word. I would like to have seen some more in London, of course, but we've got, I think, 48 out of the seats in London, less than we had. But at the same time, these are very unusual circumstances for this election, there's no question, not just in London, but across the country. And people, like we saw in the film, are, I would say, lending their vote actually to Conservatives on this particular
Well, we'll come on to that in a second, but you say, so you left it because that's what you do, you leave it to the constituency level,
yep.
They get to choose, and in many of these places, suitable people didn't come forward, did they? That goes to show just the state of the party in London now.
No, I mean, look, I mean, we're actually...
That is true, isn't it?
No.
They're able to choose. In a number of those cases, those seats, suitable people didn't come forward, so you couldn't put them forward.
No. They're able to... In many cases, actually, they wanted to not actually challenge someone who was a Brexiteer. That was the whole point. That's been the case across the country. We are still standing in the vast majority of seats in the country. But the fact is that in London, you know, when people say we're not strong in London, we've got 2 AMs in the London Assembly. You know, we had 2 AMs, 10 years ago. Basically, then we didn't have any for a while. Now we're back.
I think people might say, Peter, they might say that you've had a period of strength, but it's absolutely deserting rapidly.
No, Tim, people say that all the time about us. Since I've been in UKIP, a lot of people want us to go. We're not going to go anywhere. We are here to stay. There's no question. We are very strong in certain parts, particularly when you go outside towards the east of London, places like Dagenham.
It rather goes to making the point that we heard from the good people of Hornchurch, and they're not wrong, are they, out in Hornchurch, that in a number of your associations have decided that it's best not to challenge a Conservative Brexiteer or whatever. Conservative Brexiteers under Theresa May better able to deal with the process. Now, thanks very much for what you've done. It's over.
No, because, look, the thing is about a lot of our voters, it might seem rather old-fashioned, but the fact is they do put country before party. Right? And the fact is, as well, is that they will come back when they see what happens with Theresa May, which is that there will be softening, there will be backsliding.
You're absolutely convinced about that. What? This is just some kind of little...
No.
Hitting the floor, but you'll be back.
I am totally convinced of that for one good reason, is that this Prime Minister, when she was Home Secretary, talked very, very tough on things like migration. We were talking about migration earlier. Very, very tough on migration. She then presided over the biggest hike in migration we've seen in our history. Right? Why should we actually trust what Theresa May is going to do with this? And the fact is that the bigger the majority she gets, the softer she will get. Then I think you will see people coming back to us. But I would also say this. We have our manifesto coming out on Wednesday. But all the ideas that we have been putting forward, whether it's our integration agenda, whether it's on cutting foreign aid, whether it is on really getting migration down, all of these issues will be in the mainstream in the years to come.
Fine. And one thing we do know, and we don't have to wait for the manifesto for this, thankfully, immigration. So that 1 in, 1 out. Straight away?
No, I mean, it will be over a 5-year period.
Right.
But the fact is...
But you want to stop, don't you want to stop low-skilled and unskilled coming in straight away?
Yes, because the fact there should be a moratorium on that, because that is...
Straight away, if you were elected, right.
Yes, that is absolutely oppressed wages. There's no question about it. And it's led to basically people here not being trained for the jobs that they should be able to do. And also, there is unemployment in London. There is unemployment in this region, particularly amongst young people. And this is not being addressed.
So paint us a picture of the coffee shops across London, maybe even actually the people cleaning the hospitals on day 1 or day 10, say, once you're...
Well, you can't do it, I mean, not on sort of day 1. I mean, that's a silly way of putting it. What you've really got to do is look at it like this, Tim. When it comes to unskilled or low-skilled jobs, right, there is a glut in the market. There are basically people here cannot get jobs, that is for sure. And what is happening is that people are brought in and then paid appalling wages, whether it's in coffee shops or whatever. Big business loves that,
You know
right?
The evidence isn't for that. The evidence is for if there is a slight negative, there is a slight negative impact.
The evidence comes,
1% over 8 years on low-skilled and unskilled. And you know for the workforce as a whole, you know that it's actually slightly higher. It hasn't got any effect on wages.
The evidence has come from none other than the Governor of the Bank of England, who actually said, yes, there has been suppression of wages
1% over 8 years on a few areas.
The main point about this is that there is great public concern, right, about the level of migration. As we saw this week with the Tories, they put it virtually as a footnote at the back of their manifesto, right?
But we're talking about London. You must accept there isn't that concern, or the concern to the same degree.
There absolutely is that concern.
Any concern? What concerns do you have at all about, for instance, the loss of £5 billion, the net contribution to the economy, of those East European workers that have come in since 2004?
No, look, I dispute these figures, first of all, but the other point about it is this. It is not just about the needs of big business or, indeed, about money as a whole. It is about housing. It is about hospital places. It is about education places. We have got the biggest crisis in housing in the whole country.
But if they are net contributors and if they are contributing to the exchequer, they are helping provide the receipts that is improving that provision.
They're not improving.
Well, or are you blaming them wrongly for underinvestment which is elsewhere?
It is absolute common sense, right, that people can see for themselves. If you have huge numbers of people coming into the country, coming into London, London's population is growing by 1 million a decade, right? Yeah. Now, that is going to have an effect on housing, on education, on social services, on hospitals.
Absolutely right. 60,000 workers about a year coming in, 100,000 probably with dependents, students and whatever. What would you like to see the figure at? What's a realistic figure each year for London?
That is a wonderful thing about having a points-based system.
I know, and you've got to think through, because you'll know some of the sectors and what sectors need. Have you got an idea of it?
We want to cut migration by half. No other party is saying that at the moment. They're accepting a situation where 600,000 people come in, 300,000 people leave, so you end up with 300,000 net. We want to actually get it down to 0 net, which therefore would be cutting it effectively by half.
And you would, you think that in 5 years the level of our upskilling, the investment in further education, the workforce would just emerge to clean our hospitals, to run our cafes, work in our hotels?
This is a council of despair. So what you're basically saying is you're quite happy to have like a Ponzi scheme whereby basically you just keep on topping up and topping up and topping up. Those people have to be housed, they have to be looked after, they have to have medical services, they have to be educated. The fact is that this situation simply cannot go on. We are the only party addressing it.
Peter, we will see more details on your policies on Wednesday, as you say.
You will.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, back in 2015, the Lib Dems collapsed in London as elsewhere. They were left with just one MP. The extent of any revival would appear to depend on how much voters in a Remain city still want electoral revenge for a Leave decision. Andrew Cryan has more.
Well, at 20 minutes to 5, we can now say the decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed.
And with that, the Liberal Democrats spied an opportunity. They would try and make themselves the voice of the 48%.
Thank you, everyone. Those, madam. Assalamu alaikum. Hope you might support us. Bye-bye.
Going into this election, the party are making a second referendum their central policy.
Our argument is that it shouldn't be a Tory Prime Minister, a Tory Cabinet or Tory MPs who sign Britain's contract for the next 50 years. It should be the people. You've got one. Thank you, sir.
In theory, that should work well in London. After all, we cast more votes for Remain than anywhere else in England. But are things really that simple? Just because you voted to stay in the EU, does that mean you want the Lib Dem solution, a second referendum? One example is Gina Miller. Last year she fought and won a landmark court case against the government, forcing them to have a vote in Parliament before triggering Article 50. This election, she's running a tactical voting campaign to help pro-Remain MPs. But even she doesn't want to make the public go through another referendum.
If you believe in democracy, we have to move on. I personally am not in favour of a second referenda because I think referenda and plebiscite are difficult. I believe in our system of representative democracy. Therefore, it's about having strong principled candidates in Parliament to hold the government to account, rather than trying to reverse the process.
But of course, the Lib Dems are standing on more than just Brexit. They also oppose a third runway at Heathrow, want a ban on the sale of diesel vehicles by 2025, and want to put London's suburban railways under Transport for London control. On housing, they want to introduce a rent-to-own scheme that will help people buy a home and take action on foreign buyers, making sure that all new houses are marketed in the UK first. And they've also pledged £60 million to spend on neighbourhood policing in London.
The Lib Dems clearly needed to come up with something by way of a manifesto that would really capture the imagination. They've got 2 MPs in London at the moment, only 9 across the country as a whole, and they really need to get airtime to get back into the public imagination. And this manifesto really hasn't quite captured the imagination in that way.
opinion polls are showing the Lib Dems only a point or two ahead of what they got at the last general election. And that result saw them almost wiped out in Parliament. Broadly, in this election, the Lib Dems have got two priorities for London. The first is keep hold of the two MPs they've currently got. And after that, they want to try and re-elect some of the party's most famous faces who were kicked out in the last general election. That's people like Vince Cable, Ed Davey and Simon Hughes. And it was London where the Lib Dems chose to launch their manifesto this week. Winning those seats in the capital is central to their campaign.
I want you to imagine a brighter future. Imagine a future where our children can grow up in a country where people are decent to each other, where we have good schools and hospitals, where we take the challenge of climate change seriously.
But even Lib Dems admit they've got no realistic chance of winning this election. A good result is picking up a few seats. Even that could prove problematic.
Tom Brake joins me now to discuss his party's offer to London. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Isn't the truth here that people, and a lot of people, we've acknowledged it at the introduction here, have voted Remain in the capital, but the decision's been made now and they actually just want people and a government to get on with it?
Well, and we accept the outcome of the vote, and the country did vote for Brexit. We have a difference of opinion with the Prime Minister over what the best approach to Brexit is going to be. And Brexit, of course, has a particular impact on London that is probably more dependent on, for instance, us being part of the single market and the customs union than virtually anywhere else.
But isn't the problem that, you know, straight from the word go, we had Tim Farron, you know, much of the time he spent in the early days in London seats, that the emphasis was on the second referendum. The pure choice, if you want us to keep on opposing it, is to come to the Liberal Democrats. And is that where Londoners really are? Do they want that?
Well, I don't think it's about opposing it. It's actually about giving people an opportunity, once the Prime Minister has completed the deal, to have their say. Because what we don't know at present is whether that deal might, for instance, require the UK to pay, who knows, 30 or 50 billion euros. If that is the case, I would have thought there was a substantial proportion of people who'd be interested in having a view on that.
Yeah. You'll know from your own seat the impact, we're just talking to Peter here, but, of what UKIP might do, not standing in some seats. 7,000 UKIP votes last time around in your seat, UKIP not standing. Deliberate strategy, they claim, whatever it is. It is something that is going to potentially cost you dear if, which is what we think we're seeing, they are going over to the Tories.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. As far as we can tell, that's not happening uniformly, but I think we are pushing, in a London context, some proposals which I hope will appeal to Londoners. So we support, for instance, Crossrail 2. We are opposing the third runway, and any Conservative candidate who is a Conservative candidate is supporting the third runway. And we want to see tough action taken in relation to the southern dispute, which is affecting many millions of people.
And I will come and ask you about that, and without you actually specifying local issues, etc., because we know what the rules are about your constituency. Be honest with me. Tell me, are those UKIP voters going to the Conservatives? You're the next door seat. UKIP did very well last time as well.
Well, I'm sure that some of them will, but I think if we are campaigning on a platform that is not just about Brexit, in London, all Liberal Democrat candidates, and we've got candidates in all the seats, are also campaigning on things like the NHS, and there'll be many ex-UKIP voters who are concerned about the state of the NHS. There'll also be many UKIP voters who are worried about the state of funding in London schools, where again we've got something very positive to say in terms of how we would increase funding.
And you mentioned you're standing in all seats. Is there an issue there now as well? We've seen the Greens withdraw from a number of seats, ostensibly, in some cases, to help Liberal Democrat candidates in South West London, etc. What are they getting back? What are you putting into this progressive alliance? Wouldn't you be sensible to have stood aside in some of these seats?
Well, it's a local party decision, and in fact the local party in Caroline Lucas's seat decided not to put up a candidate. So there is one example where we have.
But why say something like Ealing, Central Acton, which we heard in Dan's seat? You know, the UKIP had stood aside there, making things potentially easier for the Conservatives. The Greens have stood aside to try and help Labour. Why would Liberal Democrats not stand aside and ensure that a pro-Remain Labour candidate wins?
Well, I guess the same question could be asked about a number of Liberal Democrat seats in London where the Labour Party and the Greens haven't stood down.
Let's ask them now.
So
you currently have 2 MPs. You're not a big player anymore.
Well, I think the party is still a party which, probably not at this general election, but at future general elections, aspires to be a party of government.
Well, we could say that about
and
anyone,
therefore
couldn't
we have to put forward candidates in virtually all the seats. When a local party, as they did in Caroline Lucas's seat, felt that the right thing to do there was to stand down, then that's something we support.
OK, are you saying that you would not, given that it doesn't look, according to the polls, and you know the normal caveats around polls, it doesn't look like the Liberal Democrats are going to be making huge progress back in this election, do you accept there should be serious thinking about realignment and the Liberal Democrats should think as a party about where it goes, what it does next?
Well, I think the difficulty, the idea of a progressive alliance, for instance, if the idea is that the Liberal Democrats would come to some arrangement with Jeremy Corbyn's Labour, is the fact that we don't support a lot of what Jeremy Corbyn is advocating. And he has, I think, almost contributed as much to the debacle that is Brexit as the Conservatives did. So I think a progressive alliance with someone who is not progressive is not something we would support.
Now, you mentioned Heathrow. Is there really any electoral advantage anymore in opposing Heathrow? I mean, Labour aren't. Conservatives have made their decision. What can you do now?
Well, we will continue to campaign on it. The residents, and there are very many millions of them who live under the flight path, who are going to be affected by a third runway, will not want, in my view, politicians to simply throw their hands up in the air and say, oh, well, it's too difficult, it's agreed, so let's forget about it. We'll continue to campaign against it. London and the South East is already overheated in terms of that type of development, and there are other parts of the country where there's actually support for airport expansion, which isn't the case in places around Heathrow.
Absolutely sticking with it, not changing that policy. Fair enough. On immigration, obviously you spent a lot of the chat with Peter Whittle on this, but the Liberal Democrats are saying you're going to make a more positive case for it. I mean, Sadiq Khan, incidentally, Labour Mayor, makes a pretty strong case. Jeremy Corbyn makes a pretty strong case for the economic advantages. But what do you mean? What would you like to see numerically happen to migration in London?
Well, I don't think you can. You can't set a figure because it does depend on the strength of the UK economy. I think what we want to see is we want to reassure people that immigration is the immigration that the UK requires, and that people who are coming to the UK are not going to buck the system in some way. I mean, what is disappointing is that the present government haven't used the powers that already exist, for instance, to ensure that if an EU citizen is not actively seeking work, they can actually be returned to their country of origin. So there are powers that already exist.
But if the economy needed it and we wanted the economy to keep on growing, you'd be quite happy to see net migration go up.
Well, I think if that is what the economy needs, if for instance, our public services, which rely very heavily on immigration, if that is what is required, then I think that is something that should be appropriate. And it's worth noting, for instance, that although, for instance, in the health service, we're starting to see immigration from the EU countries going down, all that is happening as a result is that immigration, people coming to work in the NHS are coming from instead India and the Philippines. So a reduction in one may simply lead to an expansion in another area.
I haven't got long left, unfortunately, but you had a signature policy about people being able to rent and then try and buy their property eventually to attract the young. But the young are still remembering your policy of getting rid of tuition fees. Why not reverse that?
Well, I think that's a policy that's unaffordable. What we have said is that we bring back the maintenance grants that allowed students from the most disadvantaged backgrounds to get to university, something that the Conservatives have cancelled. And the rent to own is still our policy. People would acquire a property at the end of 30 years if they'd been renting at market rents.
Tom Brake, thanks very much indeed.
I've been getting away with it all.